Everyone, welcome to this amazing and fun panel that we're going to be having, talking with Sandra with a new book that she just ended up coming out with on how to fix kind of pretty much everything. It's really great to talk with you, Sandra. I think it's going to be a really super fun conversation about how people can individually make an impact in this kind of whole entire context that we're in. So a virtual round of applause for Sandra Goldmark. I'm very excited. And before we dive into the conversation, just wanted to welcome everybody to Climate Week, as well as Marketplace for the Future. And also just wanted to give a little bit of a shout out to some of the our sponsors that made this possible. So first, the Sarah Lehigh building. So it's located in West Chelsea, Manhattan. It's home and the birthplace of Marketplace for the Future. And it's just been the home of where I have grown my business, Be Social Change, as well the Center for Social Innovation. Also wanted to give a big thanks to Just Salad. It's the first US restaurant chain to carbon label their menu, making it easier to order sustainable food, as well as Pildora, a community and one-stop shop for sustainable fashion, accessories, and clean beauty. So big thanks to our sponsors. And I just wanted to just dive into the conversation. So feel free to unmute yourself, Sandra. And good to see you again. I think last year we were on a panel last year.
Yeah, it's nice to see you. How are you?
Good. And for those of you that don't know, my name is Marco Salazar, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Be Social Change. And we host lots of different panels and events. We used to be in New York and now virtually, and very happy to be talking with you today, Sandra. So I think to kick it off, I'd love to hear from you. Just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Sure. So I'm originally a theatrical set designer. I've designed scenery for shows all over the country and a lot here in New York. And I'm a professor at Barnard College, where I teach theater, I teach design, and I also serve as the director of sustainability and climate action for the college. So that's a lot of hats, but the real reason I'm here is all of that work in terms of design and objects and creating meaning on stage translated into this really weird left turn for me professionally, a kind of wonderful left turn about 10 years ago, where I started feeling like I just was creating so much waste in the theater. Every show you build goes like right in the landfill when you're done. And I thought, this is crazy. You know, here I'm at home, like rinsing my little yogurt cups. And then I go to work and all that scenery, thousands of pounds of it goes in the dumpster. I thought, this is insane. So I started really changing my work. And one of the steps on that path was I began opening repair shops in the city, these little 3 to 4 week pop-up shops. And I would staff it with theater artists, fellow artisans from backstage. And we fixed thousands and thousands of broken objects. And all of that work investigating these supposedly valueless objects in people's homes and in our city ultimately led to the book Fixation that we're talking about today.
And I think you point out something really interesting about all of us as individuals, is that you start out with one thing, but you got to recognize that it's a journey and it's kind of a process. I think a lot of people that we've met in Be Social Change want to change significant parts of their lifestyle, and they have it with good intentions, but that can be kind of overwhelming. So I guess even before we get into the book, can you share a little bit of context of what those pop-up shops looked like, and how did they evolve over the years?
So the first one was in 2013, and we had a local businessman, a pharmacist owner here where I live in Upper Manhattan, who rented us a storefront, very cheap, for a month. And it was a little bit of like a crazy moment. So basically what happened is I had gotten a bee in my bonnet about repair, and I was on maternity leave, and I decided that we needed to write a really strong letter to Walmart and tell them that they needed to open a repair shop in the corner of every single Walmart in the country. And that this was like, you know, key to transitioning to the circular economy, and also we could get our stuff fixed. And my husband, who was, you know, maybe getting more sleep than I was at the time, he said, you know, is there any chance they might not open your email? Miss Set Designer. And I said, well, he said, could we get a little data? Like, could we show them that people are interested in this thing? Because most companies, certainly in 2013, less today, and this is key and part of the book, but most companies, certainly in 2013, were writing off repair, reuse, service, all of these kind of central components of the circular economy as not potential realistic revenue streams. So I said, all right, let's get some data. Let's open our own damn repair shop. Let's not wait for Walmart. So we got our little pharmacy storefront. We hired a bunch of friends basically from theater to fix things. So we had a costume designer who could do stitching. We had a carpenter who could help with the chairs. We hired a electrician to do the lamps. And we opened our doors, and we didn't know if anyone would show up. We didn't know if anyone had any broken things or would pay to get them fixed. We were charging for the service, which is also key part of the kind of larger economic discussion. And we were really pleasantly surprised that people showed up in droves. And we fixed everything. That was also key to our approach.
Wow.
As we realized that one of the sort of repair has historically been very specialized, right? You bring your jewelry to the jeweler, you bring your microwave to the appliance guy if you can find him, you bring your shoes to the cobbler. And we realized a specialized model in today's era was not working for people. Like 5 broken objects, 5 errands, forget it. So we brought the fixtures into one shop, and you could come with your necklace, your lamp, your stuffed lobster, your chair, your whatever, and do sort of one-stop drop-off. And people showed up like crazy, and they were willing to pay for it. And that was the beginning. That was the start where we realized, there's something here. We're tapping into something, and you know, we'll get into this, but I realized very quickly it was about more than repair. We were just touching a nerve through that entry point.
Yeah, and let's dive a little bit into that, and then I'd love to get the context and the structure of how you've laid out the book, but what do you mean a little bit more like it was more about repair?
More than repair?
More than repair.
Well, the first thing that clued me into it was that the customers, what they were saying and doing. So they'd come in with their scooter, their mother's wedding album, their black plastic window fan. No matter what it was, they would put it on the counter and start talking. And they would tell us where they bought it and where it's at in their house and how it broke and how it was disrupting their life. We started calling it stuff therapy because, like, the person at the front desk, you had to be ready to listen. You were not just there to like sort of be like, black plastic window fan, see you in a week. And so I thought, well, what is going on here? Why do people need stuff therapy? Like, why are they so emotionally invested in these broken objects? And it made me think very deeply. And again, my set designer background really primed me for this. It made me start thinking, well, what is stuff in our lives? Like, why do we have it? Why do we have so much of it today? That's something that's been written about a lot. How do we do it better? And the first thing of why do we have it, I think it bears saying, like, it is central to our species, right? Every human culture, this is what we do. We're sort of homo habilis on steroids. We make tools, we make things with tools, and we have stuff. Different cultures may have different types of stuff or different amounts, certainly. But it is as fundamental to our species as language, as art, and cooked food. And sometimes I feel like that gets lost in our conversation about consumption and waste or clutter or circular economy or whatever you want to talk about, is like, this is basic to who we are. So let's understand that before we try to fix it. So that was the first sort of outcome of stuff therapy.
Yeah. And just to chime a little bit on that, it's really fast. So my background is psychology and a little bit of evolutionary psychology. And you're making me think of a couple things. One, like, as human beings evolved, there was an evolutionary reason for us to want to own things and have access to resources, right? But it was also in the context of scarcity versus a world of abundance, which we're currently in. And then cheap abundance in all different levels. And I think the other thing is, for better, for worse, but I also think now in the age of capitalism / kind of advertising, is so many of people's identity is tied to what they own. Right. And I think what you just said is so important when anybody's trying to live a much more sustainable lifestyle. It's not simply just replacing things, but you really have to think about how that impacts you psychologically.
That's right. And so there's a very wonderful anthropologist called Daniel Miller, and he talks about Some people like to talk about, it's usually done in terms of clothing, right? They often talk about clothing as and semantics, like what is the language of clothing? What is your clothing? And you could substitute, frankly, all of your personal belongings. What do they say about you? What truth do they reveal? So yes, we communicate through our clothes and through our stuff. But this guy, Daniel Miller, he actually argues that he uses the example of an onion. He's like, there is no inner truth that you're just communicating with your clothes or your stuff. He says the choices, the material choices we make are the truth. They are the onion. It's just layers. There's nothing in the middle. You peel away all the layers. We build the truth with all of those things that we say, those choices, those layers of the onion.
Interesting.
I think it's kind of wild.
Oh, that is very wild. Yeah. So then why a book? So why did you think about writing after you were doing all this work, and most likely a lot of it in person, but why did you end up deciding to write a book?
It was partly because as I realized that it was about more than repair, that our repair shops were, because every broken object that we fix, I could see the connections to other things. I could see the connection, as we just talked about, to the individual's life, their story of who they were, right? And how that object fit into their narrative. We talked about how I began to see how our stuff fits into this kind of species level narrative, like you talked about. What is scarcity? What is abundance? Abundance of what? You know, like we've actually translated a sort of abundance of one thing for an abundance of another, if you know what I mean. Like,
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
like sort of right now, it's like an abundance of cords and wires in my life.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
But so, and then I could see the connections to design, right? Like so many things we couldn't fix because of the way they were designed, or logistics. I couldn't get parts for things, or we could get parts, or end of life when we couldn't fix something. What were the options for the customer or for us? So I began to sort of use the repair as one point and connect all the dots, and realize that that I was really excited about this whole kind of ecosystem. And that also I began to see a kind of simplicity within it. So like, it's super complex. This is basic to our species. Like, we're entangled with literally hundreds of thousands of objects. Like, modern human has like something somewhere between, or modern, Western human has somewhere between 300 and 600,000 things.
Wow.
Yeah, which is this guy, Ian Hodder estimates that. And like, sounds right to me. So but underneath that complexity, I thought, wait a minute, there is some simplicity here and some ways forward that don't have to feel, as you said earlier, super overwhelming.
Yeah. And so then how did you end up deciding to structure the book? Who's the book, I guess more importantly, who's the book for?
The book is for two audiences. One is individuals, which you already pointed out, to be like, you can do this. You don't have to feel shame about your stuff. You don't have to feel overwhelmed. You don't have to, throw away everything you own. But you can, if you're a little bit bothered by this, or a lot bothered, here's some things you can do. And it's also aimed at businesses and to some extent policy, because there are certain parts of the puzzle that an individual cannot do on their own, or it's quite hard for them to do on their own. So we need businesses to basically alter their business models, their core business models, which is a big ask, but is in fact happening in many places. And we need policy that supports and facilitates those changes.
Yeah, and I think when you were sharing a few minutes ago, what you made me think about is thinking about kind of the life cycle of a product. And I was curious if companies think about repair and fixation as a part of the life cycle of the product. And I think the point what you pointed out is that in a lot of circumstances, they don't, and there's no place for the customer to go. There's no options. And is it that they don't think about it, or is that a strategy that they don't want to think about it because they want you to buy more stuff?
I think it's a strategy, or it has been historically for many years, not that many in the grand scheme of things. I mean, basically, right now, the vast majority of manufacturers, retailers are making their money off of the sale of new goods, right? Like, if you're in the business of stuff right now, in the US, Americans spend $4 trillion each year on new goods. And right now, only something like 15 or 16 billion on used. But, so most makers and sellers are structuring their business model around selling new goods. And they're, for that reason, consciously not engaging in the potential market, secondary resale value, repair, service, maintenance. But it is changing, and it needs to change much faster because that single business model revenue stream is actually one of the major problems in the system.
Gotcha. So then, can you take me a little bit about the journey that a reader will go through in terms of when they're kind of reading the book, and what are some of the things that they'll be learning by reading the book?
So the book is structured. So I took a lot of inspiration from the food movement in terms of writing this book. The food movement is much more, I don't want to say advanced, but maybe older than what I call the stuff movement. So we have a lot of people who've been writing and thinking about the way we produce and consume food in this country, particularly. And I think for me, stuff is just like food, right? It comes from the earth. We transform it with human labor, and then we either eat it or we bring it into our homes or put it on our body. So the cycle is the same. And so within the food movement, Michael Pollan is a wonderful writer and thinker, which you're familiar with his work probably. And he had those food rules where he was like, hold on, we have a lot of chaos in the food world. We have like fad diets and people telling you to eat this and don't eat this, and it changes every 5 minutes. And he said, it doesn't have to be this complicated. And so he said, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. He was like, eat like your grandmother did, eat like traditional cultures did, and you'll be okay. And I thought, oh, there's something here for the world of stuff too. So I translated, I adapted his motto for stuff. And I said, have good stuff, not too much, mostly reclaimed, care for it, and pass it on. And that's how the book is structured. So it takes you through that's just a simple way of saying full life cycle, the full life cycle of an object, of when it comes in, how it's made, how it's designed, how it exists in your life, and then what happens at the end. And that's the structure.
Yeah, and it's interesting you related to the food movement. I've been thinking about this recently. I'm trying to remember if I heard it on a podcast of someone saying, we go through cycles, and we're in this really interesting cycle right now. And I don't know if you would say that this is mainstream, but it's getting there in the food industry, is that people are eating a lot more simple, a lot more kind of raw, a lot more, and you could say organic, but just kind of like whole foods. And there's that movement where we're kind of going back to like 150, 200 years. And it's cool to do that. It's similar to kind of like the past 5-10 years of hipsters creating very handcrafted things. Do you feel like or as part of what you want to do is us getting to a place where we're thinking about our objects and things in our life in that kind of way, where 200 years ago, if you had something and it broke, you fixed it, right?
Yes, I think that we need to go back to some of these ways of thinking. It doesn't mean that we have to go back to the way of accomplishing the goal necessarily if that doesn't work anymore. So some people today don't have the time or skills or tools or apartment space to fix everything themselves. That's okay. I still want them to be able to go to Walmart or Target or IKEA or wherever they bought the thing and drop it off for repair. Like, I think that we can build, and there's some amazing startups actually who are really leading the way on this. Basically, we need to build systems that draw from the past and draw from these basic, very smart and simple ways of interacting with the physical world, and facilitate and support them for people how we live today, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And let me know if you need to change this or disagree with this, but you also make you think about just kind of like recycling, and kind of on the thing that's interesting is that businesses have really kind of put the burden on consumers to do that. And what you did is you created, with your pop-ups, you created an option for consumers to go to solve the problem on their own. What is it gonna take for businesses to really also make this type of change and provide these options?
Yeah. Businesses need to create the systems, and they need to create the revenue streams around it, and government needs to support it with policies that work. So a good example, recycling is one example where, it's a little bit, it doesn't work sometimes. It's like recycle, but if businesses aren't buying and using those materials, it doesn't work. My favorite example of this is reverse logistics, right? So right now, if you want to order a broom from China, you could probably have it in your house tomorrow morning, right? But if you wanted to get that same broom from your house to somebody else's house across town who needs it next week, that's actually kind of hard. Like, it is possible you could put it on Facebook Marketplace, but then you have to arrange a pickup and you have to like meet the guy on the street corner and give him the broom. So we have built this incredibly powerful system for extracting resources, turning them into things, and getting them into your home. But we've built a one-way system. But that doesn't have to be that way. We totally have the capacity to build a circular system where those logistics and that power and efficiency could be applied to getting your broom or lamp or chair from your house to somebody else's, or from your house back into a manufacturing process. So that's really what businesses need to do. And the key to making businesses feel like it's worth their while is building up those revenue streams, right? They have to be making money from getting that broom, or maybe a chair, we should say. I don't know about a broom, from your house to your friend's house.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of two elements. There's an element where there is a revenue stream and an ROI to this, but that's something a little more intangible. Directly could be that it creates customer loyalty as well. Like, over the lifetime value of the customer, an organization, a company that's doing this, more likely that that person is probably going to hopefully shop more at that company. It's kind of like a Patagonia model.
Exactly. There are a lot of companies, Patagonia is some, there are also some high-end companies that are using repair and reuse and things like that, like you said, as a form of kind of like a symbol of quality or a kind of customer brand loyalty thing. I'm such an evangelical that I really want to see them truly investing in it as a revenue stream, because, not because I think we all need to like make money off of things, but because I don't think it can be like a shiny bow on top. Like, oh, look at our revenue model built on selling new stuff, and look at our shiny bow of reuse and repair. It needs to become core. And that's why I'm really excited about some of the startups that are actually making money from reuse, from repair, and from creating reverse logistic systems.
Yeah, and you're making me also think just about kind of the evolution of corporate social responsibility, where it was like the big bow on top and PR. And now there's kind of two things. It's becoming much more integral to the business operations just because there's consumer demand. And then it's even more so, we had a corporate social responsibility panel recently, and it's in the context of the pandemic and kind of this social unrest and racial justice, is that now it's kind of core. Do you see, what are some of the challenges that you feel companies may have to kind of put this type of life cycle into the core part of their business?
And there's so many, it's like as everything with climate change, I think the biggest challenge is inertia and habit. And this works at the individual level as well, because there are some really, really big players who are beginning to talk about this. It just needs to happen much faster and in a much more serious way. So, I mean, IKEA is working on circular economy. They have had pilots of resale and refurbishing. Even Apple is beginning to acknowledge that is beginning to acknowledge that they need to look at the design of the product and the core business model. I mean, they're still pretty far, but basically you can't just green your operations. You can't just say, okay, we're getting all our energy from solar panels if your core business model is always making and selling more stuff. But I see a lot of encouraging signs that, as you say, companies are starting to realize they have to look at the core business model. And in some ways at this point, it's a question of scale and speed. Again, as with so much with the climate crisis.
Yeah, and one of the other things you mentioned, I'd love to, so we're kind of thinking about, there's organizations at a big level, and there's organizations kind of at the startup that are kind of this bottom up, and then there's consumer. Where do you ideally see government playing a role in this? I know you mentioned policy, but what does that look like?
Well, here's a small scale example for policy. In our repair shops, it was really hard to open and close a shop. We did about 3 times a year, sort of 3 to 4 week shop in between, all of our regular jobs. So we essentially had huge startup costs, right? 3 or 4 times a year, because you had to like get everything out of storage and bring it to the location and pay for all of that time to sort of set up the shop and market it to the neighborhood. And then we would fix all this stuff, and unbelievably somehow, basically, it's about at the year 2 or 3, we started making a profit, very small profit. But it was enough to pay ourselves, pay our fixers, and have a little money left over for the next pop-up. If we didn't have to pay sales tax, New York State sales tax, it would have basically almost doubled our profits. So that's like a very simple, concrete example
Wow.
where I'm like, a policy change here could have made night and day for my little tiny business. So if you multiply that out and think about what are the sort of incentives that are constantly pointing us in the direction we've been going, when really what we need is incentives that are going to shift it. It's just like on the opposite end of the spectrum, farm subsidies that are pushing and propping up a destructive farming system, or subsidies that prop up the oil and gas industry. Like, the incentives and the subsidies are kind of pointing in the wrong direction.
Gotcha. And I think we've talked a little bit about this, but let's kind of put this in context. And how has the pandemic influenced how we as consumers view stuff, and how is it impacting the consumption on the planet?
So the pandemic, like as with so many other arenas, the pandemic has exposed fault lines and has exposed inequities and has exposed broken parts of the system, right? That's kind of across the board. And in the world of stuff, so we see like fragile supply chains, we see differing access between different communities to supplies. We've also seen obviously big, huge shifts in consumer spending, and it's still a little chaotic. Like, it went way down and it kind of was going back up, but not exactly the same categories as before. So, and then as you alluded to earlier, there's been a little bit of a move during the pandemic to like, oh no, you were talking about hipsters, but also like there's been a little bit of a move towards, you know, making more at home, or
Yeah,
crafting, or
totally.
like,
Yep.
you know, creating vegetable dyes.
Yeah.
So, but I see that landscape as it's still very chaotic. You know, the pandemic has sort of shaken the box, but it hasn't quite settled. What I see as the danger is settling back into the old patterns, rushing to rebuild the economy in the same old model. Now, we do need to rebuild because we need people who don't have work to have jobs and to have incomes. But the biggest hope that I have, and the biggest lesson I think the pandemic offers us, is that, and again, this is not just about stuff, is that we need to invest in a care economy, right? So repair is a form of care, right? It's like just caring for your broken stuff. It's historically undervalued and underpaid and dying in our society. But what the pandemic showed us is that many other kinds of care and maintenance are also undervalued, like health workers, childcare, teachers. These people are typically women and people of color. They are underpaid by at least $11 less than the average hourly wage in the US. And the pandemic has showed what this kind of systemic underinvestment in care does, and the price we pay.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think some of the things we've been touched upon, and I think that what happens in this context, in this current context, is it forces us to kind of reflect and kind of see a much larger picture. And then it also, for better or for worse, has really shown a light on some of the exact same things that you described. And I think for us as individuals, as companies, we really then have to think like, okay, what's the opportunity here to make change? I think is kind of one of the bigger things. One of the things that I think is important, because I'm actually going to be doing another panel in a bit about Just Food being the first company to do carbon labeling and carbon emissions. And I know that you talk about this. Can you share a little bit more about what that connection is between consumption and carbon emissions?
Yes. So, and stuff. So there, again, the food movement is a little more advanced, many people are now aware that food impacts our bodies, right? Like, that's kind of out there. Got Michelle Obama doing Let's Move on the lawn and planting her vegetable garden. We also are very aware now, I think, especially of the impact of red meat. Sometimes the impacts of our patterns of consumption of stuff are a little bit less known, but partly because I think there was so much of a focus in terms of climate solutions on renewable energy and energy efficiency, right? Which are, of course, critical, but unfortunately they're not enough. So I always like to say, like, if we could flip a switch tomorrow and transition to 100% renewable energy, that would be awesome, but it wouldn't get us there. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation has this report which says that basically that would account for 55% of our emissions, and the remaining 45% are basically our food and our stuff. So we've got 45% of our emissions that are about consumption, food and stuff, and travel. Not forget that one. But so it's a huge number. And when you factor in, now you're getting me really on my soapbox, when you factor in addition to emissions.
Let's go deep, let's go deep.
When you factor in like material impact and resource depletion and habitat depletion, like it gets really bleak really fast when you're thinking about production and consumption.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, one of the things, and I was having this previous conversation with people, like one option for individuals is this concept of carbon offsetting, and that can have an impact. But I feel part of the discussion was, is that more a treatment of the symptom rather than the kind of the core problem? Like, what are, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think for me personally, offsets are like the last resort.
Okay. Yeah.
You know, if you say, okay, I've got to take this flight, and I don't, for whatever reason, family, whatever your reason, if you really feel like you need to do the flight and there's not really an alternative, that is a good thing, I think, to offset. That's sort of my personal approach to offsets. But broadly speaking, no, I don't think that they can't be the first stop on the bus.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is kind of what your book and these conversations are trying to have, is I think people are familiar with certain things that they can do, but it's reorienting, creating a framework as well as a priority of what you should be doing first. Right. We have a couple questions in the chat box, but one of the things I want to, we have two of them, but one of the things that's really interesting that you made me think about is you were a theater designer originally, and how did that inform the book and the work in the book?
So, I mean, on the basic level, our theater skills made it so that we could actually fix things, which was important when running a repair shop. Like, we all work with our hands. And on a deeper level, that capacity of working with our hands really informed the book. This idea of it's basically, there's this phrase, kinesthetic knowledge. And I got really into these writers who, when I was researching the book, who talk about how we learn and we communicate with our hands. And right now we're a society that focuses a lot on words and the written word and a certain kind of knowledge, right? And the idea that there's a certain kind of knowledge in the body, and particularly in the hand, was something that was really interesting for me in the repair shops. And that is very resonant for me working in theater, that when you have an object, sometimes you have to touch it to know what's wrong with it. Like, it's not it's not this rationalized, let me look up in this book what's wrong with this chair. No, you literally have to like feel it and wiggle the joints, and then you know how to fix it. And I was very interested in that idea of like, what is the knowledge that can come from the body, and how do you learn and teach and transmit that knowledge, especially if there's value to it and we think we want to start fixing things again.
Gotcha. So I'm gonna there's a couple really good questions in here, and then we can wrap it up. So first question from Jen is, how do you address the notion that kind of small changes don't necessarily make a difference in the face of kind of this larger global climate change?
That is such a good question. And it's one I struggled with a lot in the book, and it formed basically the basis for the whole conclusion, which is called Fight for It. Because I really wrestled with that personally too. I was like, what the hell am I doing? Like, literally the world is falling apart, and I'm like fixing this lady's toaster. Like, this is crazy. Or telling people to fix their toasters. And I thought about it a lot, and I read a lot of other people who've been wrestling with this. And I decided for myself that I believe in the power of small actions, especially as a form of starting, right? Or a form of connecting and building community and building a movement. And third, as a way of kind of living your values, right? So Jonathan Safran Foer has this image that he talks about when he argues very passionately for the sort of importance of individual actions. And he talks about a wave, right? And how we're all these particles, but each particle forms the wave. And I loved that because I felt like it sort of breaks my heart to negate people's individual actions, to be like, you can do whatever you want, but all you have to do is go vote for the right policies. There's a writer, a very influential writer, who's kind of basically been saying that, being like, climate hypocrisy is okay. Like, I don't turn off my air conditioner. I fly all over the country, but all that matters is policy. I'm like, that's bullshit. I don't buy that. I don't. Yeah. And so I think that, to me, individual action, again, it's about, one, starting where you can and then building on it. Like, look at me. I started fixing my own stupid vacuum that was driving me crazy. And here I am, like, 7 years later, like, writing a book and trying to galvanize people. And in fact, getting, I hope, a lot of people excited about it. So just start. 2, live the way you think is right to live. And 3 is, like, form the wave. Like, if fixing your toaster is going to make you not vote, don't fix your toaster. But if fixing your toaster might help you feel like you've started the process of taking communal action, and you've started the process of building up a movement in your community, and can help you connect those dots to the bigger wave, then go for it.
Yeah, and I think that you remind me of a couple things. One, the initial just start, and hopefully you have some small wins and you can build up momentum, and then it leads to larger things. And I remember reading some research a couple of years ago, and this was probably in the 80s and 90s, but they tracked thousands of people that their whole concept of making big change was getting out in the streets and protesting and doing all these things. And a lot of people didn't feel like they were those type of people. But when they tracked people doing these small little actions that would kind of have an impact on the world or countries, they were actually had a higher propensity years later to go out on the streets and protest.
Right.
So it's
like the gateway drug.
Exactly. Absolutely. Exactly. And I think you're, again, pointing out, and I think what's so important during a conversation is, out of all these things that you do, you still have, what you're doing is creating a framework, and then there are priorities, and but that framework helps you create a decision framework to move forward.
Right. And because at the end of the day, actually, yeah, I do want you to move beyond your toaster. I want you to quickly and easily make the right decision about your toaster, and then go march in the streets. Like, I part of it is sort of, especially today, but like, stuff should be simple, easy, a source of joy, a blessing, and then let's move on. Like,
and then when you march out of the streets, hopefully you meet someone else that's trying to fix their toaster.
That's right.
So one other question was, what are kind of the most important skills to gain or start focusing on building if you want to be a better repair person? Is it woodworking, electronics? Like, what are some of those? In all honesty, as I read that question, I don't think those are skills that are typically taught in school, other than like specialized classes, right? So what does that look like in terms of someone starting out?
Well, that is the thing of rationalized knowledge, is that we teach a certain set of skills, and we have really declined in teaching other forms of knowledge. And there is a loss, not just in terms of repair skills, but in terms of lots of other things. But if you're interested in that, one of the best ways to start fixing things is actually to take them apart. So especially if it's already broken, because you kind of can't do too much damage. But if you take something apart and try to put it back together again, that's really a wonderful thing. Another, if you can, is to find a teacher, right? Like, the sort of apprentice model is historically and in our shops the best way to transmit this type of knowledge. So if you can find somebody to fix with, repair cafes offer a really nice side-by-side model where you can kind of learn to fix with the fixer. And then another really easy way to start fixing things is to make things. People who know how to make things often, know how to fix it as well. And have fun with it. It's just like,
Yeah, I think exactly. I think in a world where we're so many oftentimes in front of computers, and the only tactile thing is on our phones or computers, being able to exercise those other skills of using your hands in different ways, I think are hugely important. And also using different parts of your brain as well.
Yeah, I think it's hugely important. And I think this is getting into a different conversation, but I think it's part of our, it's a challenge for people. I think we are literally on a, evolutionary level, we're used to working with our hands and doing stuff. Like, it's a real drive, and yet we don't really feed that drive very much, or not everybody gets a chance to do that. I think it's one reason people like cooking shows and stuff, they really scratch that itch for people because it's tactile and with your hands and sensory.
Absolutely. So as we wrap up, is there any kind of last advice or thoughts that you want to give the audience?
No, I mean, I'm curious. I want to go see the other marketplace events. I'm super excited about the kind of gather stuff, and I'm curious just what people learn from this, from the whole event, from all of these exciting conversations.
Amazing, amazing. Well, thank you so much, Sandra. And if you want to put in the chat or just where can people find the book?
Oh, here's the title. And they can find several links on my website, which is this, including to some local New York booksellers. Or if you're not in New York, you can find a local bookseller in your area.
Awesome, awesome. Well, good to reconnect. And thank you so much for doing all the amazing work that you're doing.
Thank you, Marcos. It's so nice chatting.
Have a great rest of the day. Bye.
You too.